Welcome to this session of the Cyber Leaders Exchange. My guests today are Angel Phaneuf, the Chief Information Security Officer for the Army Software Factory, Shane Barney, the Chief Information Security Officer for the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services in the Homeland Security Department, and Tim Amerson, the Deputy Chief Information Security Officer for the Social Security Administration. Everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to join me. As part of our discussion of the Cyber Leaders Exchange, we're going to focus this panel on software. And I think software development, and especially from a CISO's perspective, since we have three basic CISOs on the panel, this has been a major focus, specifically over the last, I would say, 4 or so years, and specifically since I think President Biden issued the executive order really focused on cybersecurity. So Shane, let me turn to you. Software security is not new for USCIS. You guys have been out in front of the DevSecOps excitement for years. What's it been? What has software security look like? What does it look like today for USCIS?
So USCIS jumped in very early on, as you said, into agile and DevOps sort of development. I think we deployed our first system in 2009. So we've been doing it for a very, very, very long time. And as an organization, 100% cloud across the board. All of our systems are done through an agile development methodology. And so for us, a normal day is 3 or 4 major releases and a dozen or so, minor releases, and it's just that's just a Monday. So we're really quite good at that. We are obviously a heavy open source user, and as a CISO of an organization like that, obviously getting our hands wrapped around what is and what is not secure software development has been an ongoing sort of, I wouldn't call it so much as a challenge, but it has definitely been an interesting road. And especially adapting, what FISMA and other sort of policies and regulations require of us as a security program to that framework has been an interesting sort of work of art from the very get-go and continues to this day. For us, what secure software looks like is really securing our pipelines and how we go about doing that. I would say in the early years, we weren't very good at it as we sort of muddled our way through it, but now, as an organization, we've really refined how we approach it and where we place our emphasis and where we place our money, as it were, as a security organization, and how our partnership with the dev teams, especially, and the operation groups is fostered. And to me, that's actually one of the most key pieces of this entire process is fostering those relationships and ensuring that as an organization, you're operating as one and leveraging those partners in ways that make sense. For example, we have really drove a lot of our security, what we call traditionally security, off onto our dev teams and having them do that kind of stuff, whether it's you're talking about static code analysis, dynamic code analysis. That's not something my security organization really does much anymore, as much as I want the dev teams to do that. And then we build in the break releases as necessary in places that make sense. My focus remains on runtime and analytics. I want to know what the systems are actually doing versus what they're supposed to be doing. But it's definitely something we can get a lot more into in detail.
So I want to go back to the open source piece in a little bit, because I think that's really a key to this discussion as well. Absolutely. But let me ask you, when you talk about a lot of the traditional security stuff gets driven to the dev teams, does that mean the dev people have to be cybersecurity experts, or is it they just use automated tools? Well, how are you setting them up?
I'm going to say this, and I love my dev teams, but they're not innately lazy by nature, but they kind of are. And what that means is it's not that they're not hard workers. They're actually very hard workers. What they're going to find is very creative ways to do things that my security teams don't think to do. And so whether that's automating, how they do scans and vulnerability updates and patching, or how they automate some of the documentation for the system security plans. We have found that partnership, and obviously we have a huge role in terms of oversight and ensuring that the requirements are met, but we found that they're actually quite good at it. And in fact, they'd rather do it because they realize that if they build it into their overall processes, then it makes their jobs easier. They can actually predict when releases are going to get done. They feel like they're more in control, as opposed to sort of having this heavy-handed oversight organization coming in and say, oh no, you can't release because you didn't do this. Really, it's placing them more to the driver's seat and putting me where I want to be. I want to worry about production. I'm really focused in on production. That's where your attacks are going to happen, generally speaking. It's not that the dev environments and staging environments aren't important, but that's where all the fun happens. So I want to be there, and obviously security resources are finite. So you want to apply them where you're going to get the best bang for your buck. If I can leverage the dev teams to do some of my work, all the more power.
Angel, I thought journalists were the laziest people, but now maybe
Don't quote me on that.
All right, don't quote them
Exactly.
on that.
They're hard workers, but in a unique way.
Well, we all are looking for the best way to do things. Angel, I'll ask you the same question as part of the Army Software Factory. Are you getting your dev folks to do some of that security work? How are you addressing the software security challenge?
Yes, so I think I would frame it in a different way. We're doing a lot of very similar things, but for me, I would say the security engineers, we're a little more lazy and we don't want to have to do some of that work. So we've created a lot of automated pipelines that the dev teams are able to leverage and use, because then it makes us not have to do manual code reviews, because our human eyeballs are never going to catch what scanners can pick up. And that's one thing that we feel really strongly on. So I don't know if it's the devs that I would consider lazy or the security engineers that I would consider maybe lazy in that sense, but I personally don't want to go through line by line of code review. I would rather just look at an automated dashboard through a process and then audit my automation. So go back and looking and making sure that my pipelines are working the way the pipelines should be working, and I'm getting those kind of results. So we use a lot of that automation at the Army Software Factory. And the great thing for us is that we have a cohort style model where soldiers come in and learn how to do this for the first time. And a lot of them, when they graduate the cohort model, they're able to do the scans and understand what those mean, go back and fix it, and then go, before they ever get to security, then be able to come to us and deploy right into production. So it's really great because I think it gives that education and empowerment to the devs, and it just makes my life a lot easier.
We will not continue to harp on who's lazier. I still believe journalists are. We get free food and they just give us information all the time. But Angel, I want to talk real quick, the cohort model. You are on your third or fourth cohort model?
Cohort 10 applications are currently being taken in. So it's really great. We've been able to put soldiers back out into the force throughout that are able to kind of spread what they're learning at the Army Software Factory back out into the force to have a more digitally native force.
I feel like when we first met, maybe you were in cohort 3, and this is how long that we've gotten to, we've been talking about this, that I'm off by 7 cohorts, but still 10, pretty incredible. Talk a little bit as well about the Army Software Factory's approach. You said trying to kind of use a lot of automation to push forward the code reviews as an example. How else are you using automation today? What else are you in that pipeline trying to kind of make things better, faster, cheaper, if you will?
So third-party dependencies, we talked a little bit about open source, and I know we'll probably talk about it a little bit throughout here as well, but being able to look at what's actually going on in the open source, being able to create pipelines that we can scan that, we can bring that in immediately and take a look at it and see if that's something we're going to allow into our environment or not. We're able to give rapid feedback to our development team so that they can see if what they're trying to see and do is actually going to play out in production quickly and fast. So it's really nice because we're able to get soldiers that maybe have never seen a certain type of CVE or they've never encountered a certain type of area. They're able to go through those pipelines quickly, get the feedback, learn, iterate on it, and then be able to get that to be able to go into production without having any vulnerabilities in the system.
All right, more open source. We'll get there in a second. Tim, I want to have you join the conversation. Same question for you. Let's talk a little bit about Social Security Administration's process. You all are a big software development shop. I don't think folks realize probably how much software development SSA does. Talk a little bit about how you're ensuring the security of that pipeline.
Yeah, appreciate it. So, one of the environments that we have, we call it the modern development environment. And if you go through that pipeline and deployment, you'll go through the iterations of what we call our web application security testing. And we have a gamut of tools that look at it from a static, dynamic, and different codes that we have to be concerned with. So we have the repository library, and how do we maintain that repository library up, and keeping it the latest and making sure we're watching the pipeline. So that whole gamut of an ecosystem is what I consider to be the pipeline. And when you go to that, you hit the dev, you hit the intermediate, and then you hit pre-prod production. And if you make it through the intermediate, which is the intermediate/pre-prod, which is where most of the security controls are placed, then you'll be released into production. So following that repetitive model is what's really helped. And like you heard Angel talk about in reference to having pre-designed patterns, that really does make a difference. And that's where we see a lot of benefit. He also talked about getting our developers trained to be security professionals. I'll tell you, we do a thing called code batching, where we run an exercise twice a year where they can compete and actually get recognized for doing it really well. And it's a training model that kind of walks them through best practices. And you talk about, also laziness, the OWASP top 10 results is vulnerabilities in coding. If you think about those top 10 results, it's all really based off of, laziness in coding. So it's not really about, where the laziness sits. It's really about focusing on where we get the biggest bang for our buck, and where the adversaries are going to leverage those items and defending those and protecting those as best as possible. So if we can build those best practices from the get-go, we're all becoming lazy, right? Because I think what you heard is we're going to become more efficient. And that's all we really care about is, the efficiency as we secure our agencies and our citizens' data.
Maybe we should change it from lazy to efficient. Who's more efficient among us? That sounds better than lazy.
I'm trying to help.
Thank you.
I love it already. Tim, one quick follow-up. Talk a little bit about how much software development SSA does. I think folks may not realize, they think you guys are still stuck in mainframes and using COBOL and stuff like that. You all have moved really out of that, and maybe not for everything, but in a big way. Give me a sense of a typical use of software development, agile, DevSecOps, however you want to do it. How often are you using it? For how much of your code is maintained by SSA? Give us a little bit of background in that sense.
Yeah, I'll put it this way, and this isn't to get more detailed in reference to a denominator numerator. I wouldn't be able to provide that, but I'll say it this way: every day we're working in this pipeline, and think about when we talk about the mainframe and COBOL. Keep in mind, there's a translator on top of that. And that's where you're talking about some code deployment where you want your COBOL to be static in the mainframe area, but you want the interface to be where the code. So an API and different applications that lay on top of that is where a lot of the development happens, because you do have, a mainframe backend. So I do agree we do have a lot that goes through there, and a lot of it is every day doing releases. And doing a DevSecOps model with that, the security teams being there as it goes through the cycle, and having the developers side by side so they actually know what we're seeing, and being more efficient to release those codes and being protected.
Let's open up the conversation a little bit. I'd like to talk a little bit about software bill of materials, software attestation. Angel, I know just looking at a memo from Doug Bush, the Assistant Secretary or Undersecretary, I'm sure I'll ruin his title, from the Army of Acquisition Logistics Technology, who's talking about the need for SBOMs. Walk me through how you all are using, whether it's SBOMs or software attestation. How are you ensuring that the software you're using, you're buying, is meeting your goals from a security perspective?
Yes, so we do use SBOMs, and we also do SBOM-like artifacts to track which packages are being used across our digital real estate, and that those correlate to those being released, the vulnerabilities for fast identification and fixes. You can't fix what you don't know you have. And so I feel like when we talk about open source and we talk about third-party dependencies, it's so important for organizations to have a process to be able to bring those in quickly. Otherwise, your developer is just going to copy and paste, and it's not going to show up in your SBOM. And so you have to implement an SBOM solution. And we do have one. We have a pretty robust one, and we're able to use it. We leverage GitLab, and we're able to see our complete inventory and all the components. And that's been very critical for us as new CVEs have come out, and as software vulnerabilities have been released in different fashions. We're able to see what we are using and how we're using it.
Same question, Shane or Tim, either one of you want to jump in?
I can jump in on that one. As an early adopter for open source code and code practices, we quickly learned, both painfully and through experience, the importance of tracking our libraries. There's literally a plethora of different places that one can pull code from, pull libraries, whether they're pre-developed, pre-compiled or non-pre-compiled. And so one of the things we want to earn early on is that no libraries come into our organization that are pre-compiled. In other words, everything comes in as source code, and we can do the compilation, and that therefore we can do the scans, we can check for vulnerabilities, we can ensure. But the other piece to that is, and it's something we learned during Log4j, was the importance of understanding where nested libraries occurred. Log4j didn't just occur in the upper libraries of your source code. They occurred sometimes multiple layers down that your scans just wouldn't pick up, or wouldn't see, wouldn't know about. If you didn't have that history or that lineage of your libraries, you wouldn't understand where to go looking and how to find it. And there was no way to just quickly scan for it. It just didn't work that way. So, one of our biggest things, we didn't really call it SBOM, we just called it good coding practices. And then they came along and created this SBOM thing. But it really is a good coding practice to understand where all of your code is coming from and how it's compiled and why it's compiled and who's the source, ultimate source of that is, and owners are, and how that's attributable to them. And then the final piece to that, of course, is controlling that. Obviously, there are a lot of places we do not want people pulling code from. So having approved sources and approved, sort of your approved repos of where you can get open source code from and pull that, and where those libraries can be downloaded, to the point where sometimes we lock down specific sites within sets, and making sure you're monitoring that and understanding what's going on there. And the final piece of this, and I think this is sort of gets to the bigger SBOM question, is sort of those third-party services. So, modern applications are not all code developed. Any of our systems, you rely on dozens upon dozens of third-party applications, whether they're SaaS products, whether they're stuff that we purchased and integrated, or some sort of weird combination thereof. So understanding what they're using and how that's being addressed, and where that falls into your sort of overall system, profile, is really just as critical. So far, SBOMs, we haven't seen it put into FAR yet. We haven't seen it placed into law yet. And so getting compliance from those third-party vendors is proving to be more challenging than we care to think about. Some of them are really good about it. Some of them are a little hesitant about it. And there's sort of a variation about what we're getting, because there's no sort of agreed upon standards yet. So those are all things that I think as an industry whole, we need to look at and start addressing.
Looking at the libraries and the way we scan, that's kind of how we were able to get some of that visibility. But it was interesting to hear how many developers didn't realize how many multiple libraries they had of that embedded log4j. And so every time they would reestablish their library, we'd find log4j again, right? And so you're 100% correct. How do we develop a process that really has I think Angel said it as well about the visibility. So we have to get the visibility in place from the get-go. And it's that first stage of that transparency with the vendor and working with the vendor to give us that list. That's just a paper document. Let's be real. What's the important thing about is, do we have the automation capability to validate that list? And so that's where the criticality is going to be, is, are you scanning your ecosystem to see all the different software technologies that are in within the application itself? But I even go a little step further. I'm starting to look at this as a CBOM, a code bill of material, because a lot of times what happens, these software vendors will source out parts of the code. And so is there a way that you can baseline that understanding of that software bill of material to where if you see an anomaly in the code snippet, you can actually get a better understanding if there's an issue there as well? So I'm starting to look at it from a CBOM as well, not just stopping at the software, but actually at the code, and is it consistent throughout the life of the application?
Going to have to get used to, Tim, CBOM. I'm just learning SBOM. Now we have CBOM.
AI bomb. Don't forget AI bomb.
Infrastructure.
Artificial intelligence
bomb. Oh, AI bomb. Oh, the bombs.
The bombs.
The bombs. Talk a little about, Tim, from Social Security's perspective, are you asking for SBOMs yet? Are you asking for a software attestation? Where are you at in that process? I know, to Shane's point, it's not in the FAR language yet. That's still going through the process. CISO is still working on the attestation forms. But how are you working this for vendors and other third parties?
So we're asking for it, at the end of the day, but the power is in the FAR. Let's be real. I think you're spot on with that comment. And so in order to empower our acquisition community, we really have to get that FAR language updated, because it could be a resourcing constraint. And if you're lacking resources, it helps when you have a regulatory requirement coming out that we can actually leverage to get the resources appropriately to align to that requirement. So I would say it's going to take firm language to get to the point where it's an everyday acquisition discussion, just like other contract law, requires different language in there. So we're going to have to do the same thing here. I do know the subcommittees are working on trying to get that template out, and hopefully we'll have that released soon. And who knows, and the next executive order is going to require the SBOM.
And Shane, same thing for you. It's a very similar question. Are you guys, do you have it in acquisition yet? Is it on certain acquisitions?
So we've required, obviously we started requesting it as per the orders. And we've seen some compliance, we've seen a lot of no compliance. And it's sort of hit or miss. And since we don't have the ability to hold them hostage, to some requirement to do it, it's a little challenging. It's sort of them doing it out of the goodness of their gracious of their hearts. And of course, providing it initially is one thing, keeping it and maintaining it updated is another. It's outdated nearly, if it's just an electronic PDF file, it's outdated the second it hits. Especially some of these modern environments. I am really worried how big platform providers, whether you're talking Azure, AWS, Google, how they would ever comply with an SBOM, given the volume of changes we're talking about within their given environments at a very core level, and whether they'd be willing to even do something like that. Because that's something we should be worried about and being, taking into consideration. How would we address that, or what exactly, how minute do we need to get with those environments? Those are all interesting questions, I think, that haven't been fully addressed or fully flushed out. And I'm sure, and I have never spoken to any of them about this, but I can only imagine on their side, they're probably asking themselves the same question: how do we comply?
Joel, I'll follow up with you with the same question we know the memo's out. There's 90 days to start meeting some of the goals of that memo from the software from Mr. Bush. How is the software factory expecting, how are you guys looking at SBOMs or other attestation?
So I think for us, it's a little different. The other two had talked about acquisitions and holding people liable. We have soldiers, so we're able to just ask them to go do the work. So it's very different. So, hey, I don't have to work through an acquisitions contract. It's not written in the contract. We need you to actually go execute this. I'd say we're really well on track. We have our SBOMs in place. If we don't know we have it, we can't fix it. When we brought up the Log4j issue here, that happened about 2 years ago. And at the Army Software Factory, we actually were able to get that out of our environment in under 24 hours with all those vulnerabilities. And that's largely due to the part that we have green suiters working in coding development. They were able to go in, take a look, maybe stay a little bit later, and solve the issue immediately. We didn't have to go through a contract modification to be able to make sure we got that out of our system. So we're leveraging SBOMs today. We have been leveraging it for quite some time, and SBOM-like artifacts as well, so we can see exactly what's going on in our environment.
And generally speaking, for folks who maybe are a little hesitant or, well, until it's required, I'm not going to do it. Have you found that this is making your software code obviously much more secure, but also gives you a kind of that peace of mind?
It definitely gives the peace of mind. Anyone who's not implemented an SBOM or an SBOM-like type for artifacts, it's really hard to have a good idea of how your security posture actually is, because vulnerabilities are popped up every single day. And if you're unable to track where those vulnerabilities are and you don't know what's running in your environment, especially if you have a lot of applications or you're doing constant releases like we are, I would highly recommend to go implement an SBOM and not wait until it's required, because you're just going to create yourself more pain if you wait, because when a vulnerability comes up, then you're going to have to take a longer amount of time rather than being able to see it like the Log4j for us and remediate it in under 24 hours.
And I think a key piece of that is if you wait for the FAR or you wait for the regulations or whatever, how much code are you already putting in there? So there are things you're doing today, Shane, I imagine, that are maybe not under the SBOM label, but are doing very similar things that would ensure that you have that continuous monitoring and that understanding of where the code's coming from. Are we past the point, at least, are you past the point where, yeah, an SBOM would be great, but we're already there we're already 90% there or more?
So I think on this, I'm just talking just our coding, stuff that we do internally for our applications. We have a very good handle on it. Where I get a lot of concerns on a third-party risk is really the sort of the non-sort of development side of the house. Whether you're talking Cisco products, you're talking some sort of networking application, you're talking some application that's used to do photos and ingest or something. They're not related directly to your coding, not related directly to your applications, but they're used within your environment. I mean, we just saw, of course, with CrowdStrike, what happened with them. These are, and I'm not sure an SBOM would have solved that. That's sort of a different problem altogether. But you see my point is that we have these applications that are running. They may have vulnerabilities that crop up that we would have absolutely zero insight into because we've deployed their application. We're not coding for them or utilizing their code at any level. Where does the SBOM fit into that realm? I think that's actually a bigger concern for me. I'm less concerned about the coding side of our house. I'm more concerned about that side. Where and how do we go about doing that and ensure and making it make sense. I'm not really interested in doing bureaucracy for the sake of bureaucracy, and nor am I interested in compiling a bunch of electronic documents that will just sit there and collect electronic dust. If we're going to do it, let's do it right, and let's actually make sure that it's of value and both for the vendor community, by the way, as well as the government and the end users.
Shane, that's a great place to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll hear from an industry perspective, and then we'll continue our panel discussion on software security. I'm Jason Miller, and you're watching Federal News Network, the Cyber Leaders Exchange.